Welcome to Mystic Dragon Chronicles, where every tale holds a lesson. Beyond fantasy, lesson that last. Let's step into the story.
The auction on level 9 smelled like burnt wire and old grease. It was the kind of place where broken things went to be forgotten. Crates of busted NAV cores, stripped-out drone shells, cracked solar panels with half their cells missing. Nobody came here looking for treasure. They came here looking for parts, and they left disappointed most of the time. Ryland Dover was not disappointed easily. He moved slowly down the row of lots, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes moving from one piece of junk to the next. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, with short brown hair going gray at the sides and a scar along his left jaw that he never explained to anyone. He ran a small repair shop 2 levels up on Varda Station. Nothing fancy. He fixed things that other people said could not be fixed, and he charged fair prices, and that was enough. He stopped in front of Lot 47. It was a labor unit, an old domestic model, the kind that used to fold laundry and carry groceries in residential blocks 30 years ago. The chassis was dented on the left side like something had hit it hard. One arm was missing from the elbow down. The faceplate was cracked across the middle. The tag said, non-functional. Internals unverified. No reserve. The auctioneer, a thin Vedhani with 4 of his 6 arms crossed, glanced at Rylan with something close to pity. That one is not powered on since it came in. Whoever hauls it away saves me the trouble of scrapping it. Rylan was not listening to him. He was looking at the unit's midsection. Just below the chest panel, right where the secondary processor housing would be, there was a faint shimmer of heat rising off the surface. Not much. A person who was not looking for it would never see it. Dead machines did not run warm. He bought it for 11 credits. The auctioneer looked at him like he had lost his mind. Dura was waiting at the shop when he hauled it in on a gravity dolly. She was Vedhani herself, older, with deep green skin and eyes that had seen entirely too much of Ryland's decision-making. All 6 of her arms were folded at once, which was her way of expressing maximum disapproval. "What is that?" she said. It was not a question. Lot 47. I can see it as Lot 47. Why is it in our shop? Because something inside it is warm. He locked the dolly in place and reached for his tools. Help me with the chest panel. I am not helping you open a unit that has unverified internals, Ryland. That is how you get a face full of coolant or a power cell that decides to become a small explosion. He opened it himself. The chest cavity was not what it should have been. The processor housing was gone. The coolant lines had been removed and carefully capped. Someone had taken out everything that belonged there and replaced it with something else entirely. There were layers of soft insulation lining the inside of the cavity, thick and carefully packed. Woven between them were small heating coils, the kind used in medical warmers. They were still running on a tiny reserve cell tucked into the corner, nearly drained. Someone had built a nest inside this machine, and curled inside that nest was a creature. It was small, maybe the length of his forearm from nose to tail tip, for limbs folded tight against a compact body. A tail wrapped around itself like a sleeping cat's. Scales the color of deep water, dark blue with a faint shimmer of gold when the shop light caught them. 2 small nubs on its back, where something might grow later. A narrow face with a long jaw, closed eyes, nostrils that flared slowly with each breath. It was breathing. Ryland stared at it for a long time. Dura had come up behind him without him noticing. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Ryland. I see it. That is not a lizard. I know. Do you know what it is? He did not answer, because he was not sure, and he did not say things he was not sure of. He reached into the cavity slowly. His hand moved carefully, the way it did when he was working around something fragile. His fingers were just close to the creature's side when one eye opened. Deep blue, a rim of gold around the iris. Warm and clear and completely awake. It looked at him. He felt the voice before he heard it. It arrived somewhere behind his eyes, soft and small, like a sound heard through water. I know you. He did not move. The eye closed again. The creature's breathing did not change. It simply settled back into the nest like nothing had happened, like it had said what it needed to say and was finished for now. Ryland stayed crouched in front of the open unit for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the corner of the shop, and turned on the kettle. It was the only thing he could think to do. His hands were steady. His chest was not. Dura watched him from across the room. What did it say? She asked. He poured the water. Nothing, he said. She did not believe him. She never did. But she let it go, because she had worked with Rylan long enough to know that when he went quiet like that, something had already changed, and there was no point arguing about it yet. He brought a cup back to the workbench and sat down on his stool in front of the open unit. The creature was still sleeping. The heating coils were almost out of power. He found a compatible cable and connected them to the shop's main line. The warmth held. He sat there and drank his cup and did not sleep. On the third day, she opened both eyes. Rylan was at his workbench repairing a busted navigation relay when it happened. He was not looking at her. He had set up a low crate beside the unit, padded it with more insulation, and moved her into it so she did not have to stay inside the machine. She had not protested. She had not done much of anything for 3 days except sleep, breathe, and occasionally accept an eyedropper of warm nutrient broth that Rylan mixed from a medical supply kit. He heard a small sound, like a stone dropped into still water, except it was inside his head. He turned around. She was sitting up in the crate, both eyes open, watching him, up close. Now that she was awake and alert, she was different from what he expected. There was nothing animal in her gaze. No dull, reactive blankness. She looked at him the way a person looked at someone they had not seen in a long time. Careful, recognizing. He set down his tools and pulled his stool over. He sat in front of her and said nothing for a moment. Then, "How are you feeling?" The voice came again. Behind his eyes, quiet and clear. Hungry. He got more broth. She drank it differently this time. No eyedropper. She lapped from a shallow dish he set on the edge of the crate, precise and unhurried. When she was done, she sat back and looked at him again. "Your name," she said inside his head, "is Rylan Dover. Your service number was 14RD Sigma 7. You were assigned to the 14th Rapid Response out of Halcyon Base. You lost 4 people in the Velker corridor, and you have not spoken about it since." Rylan did not move. His face did not change. He had spent years learning how to not let things show on his face. "How do you know that?" he said. "I was there." "In the corridor." "Not in the way you mean. Not in body." She tilted her head slightly. The gold rims of her eyes caught the shop light. "I have been near you for longer than you know. Watching is not the right word. Aware. I have been aware of you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "For how long?" She considered. "Your whole life. And before." He sat with that. He did not argue it. He was a practical man, and a practical man looked at the evidence in front of him. The evidence in front of him was a small blue creature who knew his service number and the names of his dead. He could spend time being shocked, or he could spend time finding out more. He chose the second option. "What are you?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said a word he did not recognize. It sounded old. Heavy. "I don't know that word," he said. "Your scholars called us Drayson." "That is close enough." He had heard the word. He had read it once in a history fragment, a passing mention in a galactic archive he had accessed years ago out of boredom. Extinct. 800 years. He had not thought about it since. "You're supposed to be gone," he said. "Most of us are." There was no grief in her voice. Just fact. A few were hidden. I was one of them. I was placed inside that unit by someone who loved me very much, a long time ago, and told to sleep until the right person found me. And I'm the right person. You always were. Dura chose that moment to walk in from the back storage room. She stopped. She looked at the creature sitting upright in the crate. She looked at Rylan. She looked back at the creature. All 6 of her arms went completely still, which was the Vethani equivalent of a human going white in the face. "It is awake," she said. Rylan said. "And yes." Dura approached slowly. She stopped a few feet away and studied the creature with the careful, professional attention she gave to complex repairs. The creature looked back at her with equal calm. "She is Drayson," Dura said quietly. Rylan looked up. "You know what that means." "I am 312 years old, Rylan." "I know what that means." Dura lowered herself onto a second stool. Her voice had changed. The usual dry edge was gone. Vethani archivists have records. Very old ones. The Drayson were the first species to map fold space. Every ship in this galaxy travels the way it does because of them. The creature dipped her head slightly. An acknowledgement. "Does she have a name?" Dura asked. Rylan opened his mouth and then stopped. A word had been sitting in the back of his mind for 3 days without him knowing where it came from. He said it now. Solene. The creature's scales shimmered. A ripple of gold moved through the blue, just for a second, and then settled. She made a sound that was not quite a sound, more like warmth spreading across the inside of his chest. That is acceptable, she said. Dura exhaled slowly. Well, she folded 4 of her arms and rubbed her face with the other 2. This is going to be a problem. Before Rylan could ask what she meant, there was a knock at the shop's front door. He went to answer it. On the step outside stood the scrapper who had sold him the unit at auction. A small, battered droid named Prox, with mismatched optical lenses and a body that had been repaired so many times it was barely the original model anymore. Prox did not ask for money. He did not try to sell anything. He said, "Did she wake up?" Rylan stared at him. "You knew what was in there." "I have been moving that unit from station to station for 11 years, Prox said. "Keeping it off the manifests. Keeping it away from the wrong eyes." He looked past Rylan into the shop, and something in his optical sensors softened in a way that old droids rarely managed. "I did not choose you, Mr. Dover." "She did. Weeks before the auction. I just made sure you were there." He turned and walked away before Rylan could speak. Rylan stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back inside, sat down on his stool, and looked at Solene. She looked back at him, perfectly calm. "You chose me," he said. "Yes. Before you ever met me. I already knew you," she said simply. The shop was quiet. Outside, the station hummed around them, thousands of lives moving through metal corridors, none of them knowing what was sitting in a padded crate in a repair shop on level 7. Rylan picked up his tools. He did not start working. He just held them. "All right," he said finally. That was all. Just all right. But she shimmered gold again, briefly, and he decided that was enough for now. 2 weeks later, Solene no longer fit in the crate. She had grown the way water fills a space, quietly and completely, until one morning Rylan came into the shop and found her sitting on his workbench instead, her tail hanging off the edge, her head nearly level with his when he stood in front of her. She was now the length of his arm from shoulder to fingertip. The nubs on her back had become small, ridged wings, still folded and soft, but unmistakably there. She ate everything, constantly. Nutrient broth had given way to protein paste, then to whole food packs, then to the ration blocks Rylan usually kept for long shifts. She ate with focus and without apology. He had started buying in bulk. She was also, finally, talking more. Not in long speeches. She was careful with words, the way old things sometimes are, choosing them slowly like she was selecting the right tool for a delicate job. But over the course of those 2 weeks, piece by piece, she told him what she was and what had happened to her kind. The Drayson had not been destroyed. Not entirely. There had been a war, long before any living species had a written record of it. The Silence War, the archives called it, though Solene said that was not the right name. A faction of powerful civilizations had decided that the Drayson held too much. They mapped fold space. They held the keys to how everything moved across the galaxy. That kind of power, in the opinion of those civilizations, should not belong to one species. So they moved to take it, and when the Drayson would not give it, they moved to end them. The Drayson elders had known it was coming. They had time to make a choice. Some fought. Most did not survive either way. But a small number, the youngest, were put into deep biological stasis. A dormancy so complete that no scanner in the galaxy could distinguish them from dead tissue. And they were hidden. Inside objects. Inside the walls of derelict ships. Inside the bodies of machines. Scattered across 1,000 systems, tucked away in the dark, to wait. Wait for what? Rylan asked. For our witnessed souls, Solene said. A Drayson in stasis cannot wake on its own. The body waits for proximity. For the one specific individual it is bonded to. Bonded how? We do not choose. It simply is. The way a compass points north. I have been pointed at you since before your birth. She looked at him steadily. A Drayson who wakes without their witnessed soul wakes wrong. Confused. Dangerous. I woke clear because of you. Dura, who was pretending to sort components on the other side of the shop and was very obviously listening, made a small sound. Rylan ignored it. How many of you are still out there? Still sleeping? I do not know. Many were found and destroyed. Some may still be hidden. I cannot feel them from here. She paused. I may never know. He did not push on that. He could hear the weight in it. What he did push on was the other thing that had been bothering him for 3 days. Soline's presence in the shop was producing heat. Not a lot, but her metabolism was active now and climbing, and active metabolisms produced energy signatures. He had already noticed the temperature in the shop was running 2 degrees warmer than the station average. A subtle thing. The kind of thing that would not show up on a casual sweep. It would show up on a dedicated biological scan. On the 14th day, Dura came in from outside with her expression set in a way that Rylan recognized. Controlled. Careful. The expression she used when she had bad news and was deciding how to deliver it. Military inspection team docked an hour ago, she said. Commander out of Halson. Name is Wellen Hast. They are running a sweep of all commercial sectors. She paused. They are looking for anomalous biological signatures. Rylan looked at Soline. Soline looked back at him. They cannot have me, she said. Her voice was quiet. Not afraid. Simply clear about the facts. They will not understand what I am. They will study me until there is nothing left to study. Rylan stood up and walked to the wall where he kept a rack of older station maps. He pulled down the level 7 commercial grid and spread it on the bench. He looked at it for about 30 seconds. How long until they reach this sector? He asked Dura. At their current pace, 48 hours. Maybe less if they prioritize warm signatures. He nodded. He rolled the map back up. Dura crossed 4 of her arms. You have an idea? I have the beginning of one. Is it a good idea? He considered the question seriously. No, but it's the kind of bad idea that has a reasonable chance of working, which is different. He started moving. He pulled the scan baffles from the back storage room, the ones he used to shield sensitive prototype work from station diagnostic sweeps. Standard equipment for any serious repair shop, nothing that would raise flags. He handed them to Dura. Line the back wall and the ceiling. Make it look like they've been there for years, because 2 of them actually have been. She took them without argument, which told him she was worried. Dura only stopped arguing when she was actually worried. He was worried too. He just did not say it. Soline watched him work. After a while she said, You are not going to hide. I'm going to make it so they don't look very hard. That is different from hiding. Yes, he said. It is. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the Velker corridor. You stayed until everyone was out. He kept working. Not everyone. 4 of them were already gone before you could reach them. You know that. I know what I know. She made that sound again, the one that felt like warmth spreading through his chest. You have always done this, she said. You put yourself between the danger and the thing that needs protecting. You have done it every time, in every life. He stopped and looked at her. Every life. You have had more than one, she said simply. So have I. We have found each other before. Not always easily. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he went back to work, because there were baffles to install and 48 hours was not as long as it sounded, and he had never been the kind of man who stood still when there was something to do. But his hands were not quite steady, and he was glad Dura was facing the other wall and could not see it. Rylan walked into the inspection office at 0700, before the team had finished their first round of sector assignments. He did this because the worst possible moment to be questioned is when someone is already looking at you. The best moment is when you show up first and make them look at everything else. The officer at the desk was young, a lieutenant with the kind of precise uniform that meant he had not been in the field long enough to learn that precision attracted the wrong kind of attention. Rylan introduced himself as the operator of Dover Repair on level 7. He said he had heard about the inspection and wanted to get ahead of any paperwork complications because he had several pieces of prototype hardware under active NDA with a manufacturing client out of Drayson Hub, and he did not want his client to receive notification of a routine scan without prior warning because that kind of thing spooked corporate contacts, and he had worked too long building that relationship to lose it over a misunderstanding. The lieutenant blinked several times. Rylan kept going. He talked about the hardware. He talked about the NDA clauses. He talked about thermal-regulated components and how standard scanning protocols could, under certain conditions, damage calibration settings in ways that were not immediately visible, but showed up 3 months later as cascading failures that the manufacturer would absolutely trace back to the inspection event. The lieutenant eventually approved an early visit just to make Rylan stop talking. Commander Wellenhast arrived at Dover Repair at 0900 with 4 officers and a scanner unit. Rylan met them at the door. Dura stood at the back of the shop, calm and occupied with what looked like routine maintenance work. Solene was not visible. The inspection team moved through the front section without incident. They opened drawers, ran the scanner over work surfaces, checked the parts inventory. Standard procedure. Rylan answered every question they asked with exactly as much information as the question required. Not more, not less. Then one of the officers stopped in front of the sealed crate in the corner. It was a standard cargo crate, latched shut, with a label that read, Thermal Calibration Regulators, Class 4 Sensitive Equipment. Do not scan per Reg 7.14C. The officer looked at his scanner. He looked at the crate. He reached for the latch. Rylan started talking. He talked about Regulation 7.14C and its origins in the Drayson manufacturing incident of 40 years ago. He talked about the specific type of calibration regulator inside and the documented effect of active scan fields on piezoelectric sensor arrays. He talked about the replacement cost, which he named as a number large enough to make the officer pause. He talked about the 3-page liability form the officer would need to complete if he scanned equipment covered under the regulation and it subsequently failed. The officer's hand came off the latch. Rylan kept talking for approximately 40 more seconds to make sure. Hast had been standing near the back wall the whole time. He had not touched anything or asked anything. He had just watched Rylan with an expression that was difficult to read. When his team finished and moved toward the door, he stayed. The shop went quiet. 14th Rapid Response, Hast said. Velker Corridor Operation. 7 years ago. Rylan looked at him. Yes. You were the one who went back in. I was the last one out. That's different. Hast studied him for a moment. He was older than his rank suggested. The kind of older that came from seeing specific things rather than from simply accumulating years. He glanced slowly around the shop. Not searching. Just looking. This station has been running warm in 2 sectors for the past week, he said. Biological origin. We haven't pinpointed the source. Rylan said nothing. Hast looked at him for another moment. Then he put on his cap, adjusted it, and walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold. You've got a clean shop, Dover. I appreciate you coming in early. Makes the job easier. He left without looking back. Rylan did not breathe normally for about 30 seconds after the door closed. Dura emerged from behind a shelving unit she had not actually been working at. She had been standing completely still back there. That man knows something, she said. Maybe. He did not push. No. She was quiet for a moment. Why? Rylan picked up a tool from the bench that he did not need and put it back down. I don't know yet. The sealed crate made a small sound. He went over and opened the top carefully. Solene was inside, curled tight, completely still. She had not made a sound the entire time. She looked up at him now with calm blue eyes. You were magnificent, she said inside his head. I talked about sensor arrays for 4 minutes. Yes, magnificently. A pause. Your heart was very loud the entire time. Good thing nobody else could hear it. That evening, a message arrived on an encrypted channel. No sender name. Just a symbol, a spiral drawn inside a circle, the lines thin and precise. Below it were coordinates and a time, 20 hours from now, and nothing else. Rylan showed it to Dura. She went still in the Vethani way, all her arms at once. He showed it to Solene. Her scales shimmered from blue to deep gold and back again, slowly, like light moving through water. She stared at the symbol for a long time. The Conclave, she said quietly. Rylan waited. They are old, she said. Older than the war. They have been keeping records, protecting what they could, waiting. She paused. They found my signal. Dura said, Is that a good thing? Solene did not answer immediately. They are not enemies. But they have their own purposes, and those purposes are very old. Dura looked at Rylan. So, good or bad? Rylan read the coordinates again. A decommissioned observatory ring, 2 hours out by short-range shuttle. Isolated. Defensible, if it came to that. An odd choice for a threat, and a reasonable choice for a meeting that needed to be quiet. I'm going, he said. Dura made a sound like air escaping a seal. Of course you are. You don't have to come. She was already pulling her coat off the hook by the door. I have been your partner for 9 years. I have watched you drag home broken things from level 9, fix them all, and then become personally responsible for every single one of them. I am not staying behind now that the broken thing is an 800-year-old mythological creature. She pulled the coat on. I am simply going to complain about it the entire way there. Solene made the warm chest sound. Rylan picked up his jacket. Outside, Varda Station moved around them in its usual rhythm, loud and indifferent, and full of people who had no idea what was sitting in a repair shop on level 7. He was glad about that. He intended to keep it that way for as long as he possibly could. He had a feeling that window was closing. The observatory ring looked dead from the outside. No docking lights. No active transponder. The structure itself was old, maybe 150 years, a wide circular platform with observation domes along its outer edge and a central hub that had gone dark long ago. It drifted in a slow, patient orbit, the kind of orbit that meant nobody had bothered to correct it in decades. Rylan brought the shuttle in through a maintenance hatch that, according to the encrypted message, would be unlocked. That detail bothered him more than a locked door would have, because it meant someone had been here recently and wanted him to know they were prepared. Solene rode on his shoulder. She was warm against the side of his neck, her claws light and careful on his jacket. She had grown enough that riding there required some balance on both their parts, but she managed it without complaint. The central hub was not empty. 3 figures waited in the low, blue-tinted emergency light that someone had switched on for the occasion. The first was an elderly Vethani with white-edged skin and a scholar's coat. The second was a being Rylan could not immediately classify, tall and thin, with no visible face, whose communication came in slow pulses of light from a band across what might have been its chest. The third was a human woman. She was small, perhaps 70 years old, with close-cut gray hair and an expression that had forgotten how to be surprised by anything. She spoke first. Rylan Dover. I am Warden Sable. Please sit down. We have limited time and a great deal to cover. He remained standing. Who are you people? The Conclave, Solene said softly from his shoulder. Not for him. For the room. The elderly Vethani made a sound like a long exhale. The light being pulsed twice. Sable's expression shifted into something just briefly unguarded. And in that unguarded second Rylan saw relief, so deep it looked like it had been waiting for years to get out. She is awake, the Vethani said softly. After all this time, she is actually awake. And she chose well, Sable added. She looked at Rylan with something between assessment and warmth. Please, sit. What I am about to tell you will be easier with your feet off the floor. He sat. Dura sat beside him. Solene stayed on his shoulder. The Conclave had been operating in secret for 6 centuries. Not a government, not an organization with a name that appeared in any official record. A collection of individuals across many species who had committed to one purpose: protecting what remained of the Drayson and preserving the knowledge of what they truly were. The Drayson had not simply mapped fold space. They had discovered it. They had found it the way a person finds a door in a wall they thought was solid. The mathematics behind every jump drive, every fold point, every faster-than-light transit in use anywhere in the galaxy traced back to work the Drayson had done and shared freely centuries before the war. The species that attacked them had used Drayson knowledge to build the weapons that ended them. That particular detail had been buried very thoroughly. The Conclave knew this. They had spent 600 years collecting the proof. Why haven't you done anything with it? Rylan asked. Sable said, because proof without a living Drayson is a document. A document can be dismissed. A living Drayson, awake, bonded, speaking for herself, is not so easy to ignore. She looked at Solene. And a Drayson, without her witnessed, cannot function at her full capacity. They wake wrong. Confused. The bond is not decorative. It is structural. What does that mean for her? Rylan asked. The Vethani scholar answered. A witnessed is not a guardian in the military sense. The old texts say it differently. The witnessed is the person who reminds the Drayson who they are when they surface from the dark. Without that anchor, they rise like a fire with no direction. With it, they rise like, he paused, searching, like a fire that knows what it is for. Dura looked at Rylan. He did not look back at her. Solene was very still on his shoulder. Then she did something he had not heard her do before. She opened her mouth and spoke aloud. Not in his head. Out loud, in the room, in a language that was not any language he recognized. The sounds were deep and deliberate, and each one seemed to take up more space than it should. The 3 Conclave members went completely still. When she finished, the silence held for a long moment. Sable's eyes were bright. The Vethani had his face turned down. the light being pulsed gold, once, slowly. What did she say? Rylan asked. Dura answered, quietly. She named you. Formally. In the old language. She paused. In Vethani there is a word for it. It means something like, he who is expected, the one the waiting was for. Rylan was quiet for a moment. I fix things, he said. For a living. I fix broken things in a shop on level 7. Yes, Sable said, and her voice was gentle. That is exactly what you are. The silence after that was a comfortable one, which surprised him. Then Sable's expression changed. The gentleness stepped aside for something harder and more immediate. She reached into her coat and unfolded a screen, setting it on the surface between them. Now, she said, the problem. The remnant. The words sat in the room like a stone dropped on a table. Descendants of the original faction. Not the same people. Those were centuries dead, but carrying the same objective, passed down through generations in silence, funded by old wealth and old hatred. They had been searching for sleeping Drayson for 200 years and destroying them when they found them. 11 confirmed. Possibly more. They had detected Soline's awakening signal 3 weeks ago. Their ship, Sable said, is currently 16 hours out. The room took that in. Rylan looked at the screen. He looked at the route data, the ship class, the projected arrival window. He looked at the Conclave. He looked at Soline, who was watching him with calm, steady eyes. All right, he said. Sable raised an eyebrow. That is all. Do you have the evidence files? Everything the Conclave has collected? Yes. Can I access them? She hesitated. Then she passed him the screen. You have about 30 minutes before we need to move. He took the screen. He started reading. He read the way he worked on machines, with complete attention and no wasted motion, moving through the files quickly, building the picture. Dura watched him. After a while she leaned slightly toward Sable and said, in a low voice, he is going to do something that looks reckless and is actually very specific. I have seen it before. It is alarming every time. Sable looked at Rylan, then back at Dura. Is it effective? Dura considered. Annoyingly, yes. On Rylan's shoulder, Soline pressed her head gently against his jaw. She did not speak. She did not need to. He kept reading. The remnant's ship dropped out of fold space 40 minutes early. Sable received the alert and went quiet in the specific way that people go quiet when the plan they were holding has just become shorter. The Conclave members moved to the observatory's control hub, pulling up what limited sensor data the old structure still had available. The remnant vessel was a mid-class enforcement ship, heavily modified. It was not broadcasting any standard identification. It sat in space outside the observatory ring like a word that had not been spoken yet. Then it began charging a capture beam. Rylan stood at the door to the outer observation deck and looked at the screen in his hand. He had 30 minutes of reading time. He had used 28 of them well. He looked at Dura. Stay inside, he said. Absolutely not, she said. Dura. 9 years, she said. I have never once stayed inside. Why would I start now? He did not have time to argue it. He walked out onto the observation deck. Dura followed. The deck was enclosed in a pressurized dome, old but intact, with a wide curved viewport that looked directly out at the stars and, currently, at the dark shape of the remnant vessel hanging in the near distance. Soline was on his shoulder. She had grown again. In the hours since they arrived at the observatory, she had grown enough that her weight on his shoulder was real and noticeable. Her wings, when she spread them slightly to balance, were each now longer than his forearm. The gold in her scales was brighter than it had been that morning. She pressed her head against the side of his jaw once, briefly, and then raised it and looked at the ship outside. Rylan opened a broadcast. Not a targeted signal. All channels. Civilian, military, conclave frequencies, and 4 frequencies that he was technically not supposed to know existed, but that he had cataloged over years of working with ex-military hardware that came through his shop. He had an excellent memory for things like that. He stated his name, his station registration, and his location. He stated that he was transmitting under emergency disclosure and that the content of the broadcast was a matter of historical record and active criminal conduct. Then he read from the files. Names, locations, dates going back 2 centuries, species and coordinates of 11 confirmed destroyed Drayson, financial records showing the funding chain across 4 governments and 9 private entities. The names of the original faction members and the documented line of succession into the modern remnant organization. He read for 11 minutes. He did not rush. He did not editorialize. He let the documents speak in the flat, factual voice of accumulated evidence, because that voice was harder to argue with than any emotional one. The remnant ship stopped charging the capture beam. The first response signal came from Commander Hast's vessel, which had apparently been running a quiet parallel sweep of the sector. Then 2 Conclave ships appeared at the edge of scanner range, having held position in silence, waiting. Then a civilian relay station picked up the broadcast and began retransmitting. The remnant ship held its position, uncertain. The situation had changed faster than anyone aboard it had anticipated, because nobody aboard it had planned for a human with a good memory and no hesitation to open his mouth on all channels before they could establish control of the scene. Celine moved. She stepped from his shoulder to the viewport and pressed herself against the inside of the dome glass, both front feet flat against it, wings half spread. She was facing the remnant ship directly. She did nothing aggressive. She did not light up or make a sound. She simply looked at the ship through the dome with steady blue eyes. Haast's communications officer reported afterward, in the official log, that every screen aboard the remnant vessel simultaneously displayed the same image, a spiral inside a circle, burning steady gold, for approximately 40 seconds. The remnant ship powered down its weapons. It did not leave, but it did not advance either, and in that moment, not advancing was enough. Haast docked at the observatory 30 minutes later. He walked in with 2 officers and stopped in front of Rylan and looked at Celine, who was now sitting on the back of a chair in the hub with her tail curled around its legs, watching the new arrival with polite attention. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Rylan. "You know what happens now," Haast said. "There are institutions, governments, species councils. All of them are going to want to know what she is. All of them are going to want access." Rylan said, "I know. That's going to be complicated. Every one of them is going to have to start with a conversation with me," Rylan said. "And I've been told I'm hard to have a conversation with." Dura made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Haast was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor, then back up. "Vulcar Corridor. The after-action report says you stayed behind to secure the exit route." Rylan waited. "4 of your people were already gone before you reached them," Haast said. "I read the full report. Not the summary. The full one." Rylan said nothing. Haast straightened. "I'll file the inspection clearance and mark your shop as verified. The remnant vessel will be held for boarding under the evidence you just broadcast to half the sector." He put on his cap. "Clean work, Dover." He left without waiting for a reply. The hub settled into quiet. Sable was smiling for the first time since they had arrived. The Vedhani archivist was making notes with shaking hands. The light being pulsed a warm amber, slow and steady, like a heartbeat returning to normal. Dura lowered herself into a chair and placed 4 of her hands over her face. "I need to sit for a moment." "Sit as long as you want," Rylan said. Celine came to him. She climbed from the chair back to his shoulder and pressed herself close to his neck. She was warm. She had been warm since the first night, in the crate, in the nest inside the broken machine. That warmth had not changed. It was the same warmth. "You are shaking slightly," she said inside his head. "Am I?" "Yes." "Adrenaline." "Yes," she said. "That is one word for it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I knew you before the auction. Before the station. Before this life." He kept his eyes forward. "How far back?" She considered for a while. "Far enough that your kind did not yet have a word for stars. You looked up at them, and you reached for them anyway." A pause. "You have always done that. Reached for things in the dark." He did not say anything to that. He reached up and put his hand over her small clawed foot where it rested on his shoulder. Outside the old observatory, the galaxy was doing what it always did. Moving, trading, arguing, forgetting. Thousands of ships threading fold space routes that existed because of a species that everyone had agreed was gone. The galaxy had spent 8 centuries forgetting what a Drayson was. That was about to change.